Good afternoon. This is an event, as you can see, jointly organized by Practical Action and Duryog Nivaran. Practical Action is an international NGO that has been working for over 40 years in development, and disaster management is one of the key areas that we look at as an impediment to sustainable development. Duryog Nivaran is a network of South Asian practitioners and academics, researchers who's interested in finding solutions to disaster risk reduction. In fact, this was started in mid-90s when, when things were not as clear as this. And the theme today is Building Back Better. And let me ask Theo Shelderman, he's from Practical Action UK office, to tell us a little bit about Building Back Better and how we see Building Back Better in reconstruction.
Hello? Okay, it works. We've been doing a lot of work in Practical Action on reconstruction in the last 20-25 years. There are a couple of things that are crucial to us. One is that if you want to build back better, you need to think about more than just the end product, that is the safer house. In fact, you need to think about how can you make people more resilient and not just how can you make houses more resilient. That's not new. That's something that we've learned from working in the housing sector that much longer. It's something that people like John Turner said when he was working in Peru with people who are working in informal housing. It's actually the process that's a lot more important than the end product. Because it's the process that helps to empower people, and that ultimately in the case of reconstruction will also help to make them more resilient. So one of the first things I would like to say is learn from the housing sector. We find that the reconstruction sector is running a lot behind actually in its thinking, and there's a lot to learn in housing. Secondly, because it's the process that's important, it's the people that need to be at the center of it. And we as agencies and the government need to support it. Thirdly, we need to work with the local institutions, not just the local communities, but also with the local authorities and the other institutions that are there. They're often bypassed in disasters, and it's wrong because they need to be there with us in partnership. And finally, we shouldn't think about housing in isolation. Of course, housing comes with services like water and so on, but there's a crucial link to be thought of with the livelihoods of people. Too often we see that people are relocated in places far away from where their livelihoods are, that houses are designed for them without taking care of the kind of livelihood activities they have, and that the whole housing construction doesn't think about how it can help to stimulate the local economy. All those things are important in creating resilience. Thank you.
Thanks, Theo. I think that kind of introduced you to Building Back Better in reconstruction, and I think as many of you all probably are aware, Building Back Better in reconstruction started with the Gujarat earthquake in early 2000, and since then quite a lot of interest, lots of good examples came out, and we were actually expecting Santosh to be here to speak about a minute about the experience, Gujarat experience, but since he's not here, let me ask Vajira, who's going to extend Building Back Better experience to the to livelihood rebuilding. He's been working with a community who's been affected by conflict, which is conflict is very similar to post-conflict is very similar to post-disaster. Everything is destroyed and destructed. So Vajira will tell you about rebuilding livelihoods.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Now, I would like to start from what Theo was explaining, that in a post-conflict scenario, we were working with a post-conflict scenario in one of the village in eastern part of Sri Lanka. And you know, now in a post-conflict scenario, most of the social institutions and some of their livelihoods have been tremendously affected for the communities. So therefore, it's very challenging for us to rebuild there at the first place. So I would like to share that our approach was to, like Theo explained, about rebuilding not only the community but the local institution and their capacities. So at the first level, we were looking for some of the tools and some of these, not only the build on the community's knowledge, as well as knowledge of the data available in the local institution. We have to go further down to get some far away, for example, for rainfall data, to identify some of these disasters, some of these constraints, seasonality they were having. So during this our approach, the toolkit we have been used will be launched as a CD for tomorrow in our side event at 12:30. So I would like to invite all of you to come there and get how practitioners can apply some of the tools we have been using for post-conflict and post-disaster scenarios. So in addition, I would like to say now this particular community, when we working with them, they have identified their tank rehabilitation and irrigation system rehabilitation as the priority. So with the Department of Irrigation and local other institutions such as the political authorities, we were working with the community and finally able to rebuild their livelihoods. And during last January, with the 100-year, the entire country was affected by 100-year floods. Even when we use some of these tools, we were able to capture only people's knowledge where they can remember 30 years floods. But this was a huge 100-year floods, and some of the tank rebuilt, it was slightly breached, and this remind us to take into account some of these climate change and uncertainties where not only the people's knowledge and the memory would not enough, even to look at some of these further expand our planning horizon and get some data and plan ahead. So that is the lesson we have. Please come to our session tomorrow for you can take this the toolkit.
To wind up, let me ask Maggie to talk about vulnerability to resilience.
Okay. Let me just now zoom up a level and speak more about practical actions, framework for analysis, and how to work with communities. You've heard from Theo about our real belief in being people-centered and building livelihoods and the importance of processes. And you've also heard the importance of working with institutions. And through our work, primarily through our disaster risk reduction work at Practical Action, we've decided to develop a framework so that we can bring a more holistic approach for our work. We've been hearing throughout the conference the need for integration. And so we've come up with this framework called Vulnerability to Resilience, which is online. And I'll just tell you briefly about the framework as a way of guiding and integrating our work. So we've spoken a little bit about livelihoods and the importance of being people-centered and looking at how to restore and safeguard people's livelihoods assets. We've also touched on very briefly about hazards and the importance of doing risk assessments and connecting the two, people's livelihoods with the risks that they're facing. The third element, which is quite important to also link in, is different trends. So when you're looking at livelihoods and risks, one needs to also consider trends like climate change, but also trends like globalization and the impact that's having on food prices, urbanization, and how those processes are influencing risk and vulnerability, and taking that holistic picture together. The fourth element of the vulnerability to resilience framework is the governance aspect. And I think this conference is a very good example where we see policies being shared at the national level, certainly, but also different questions about how do you bring the national level policies to have real impact at the local level. So an understanding and questioning of the different stakeholders, who the champions are, how these institutions work together, and where there are room for influence, and where there's a need to open up a space for influence. Certainly in a lot of countries where we work, a strong role is about opening up a space for institution influencing. And so practical action, as you've heard through some of the case studies here, endeavors to bring this holistic approach together and bring people from vulnerability to resilience. And certainly through our disaster risk reduction work, most recently in Nepal, we've also been trying to demonstrate how this holistic approach, also now in a time of limited funding, is also a real cost benefit to our funders. And so I think we're calling really for action around integration, action around building on people's livelihoods, considering the governance institutions, looking at trends, and making sure that we build around the information around risk reduction. So if you'd like some more information about the Vulnerability to Resilience Framework, we have a copy here. We also have some pamphlets, and there's quite a lot of information online and case studies. I'm Maggie Ibrahim, so you can contact me on my email, and there's also my colleague Pete, who's had many, many years of experience in the field that can share some more detailed cases with you.
Go ahead. Okay, let me ask Santosh to give us some last words.
Thank you very much. I would focus on the two examples of the Gujarat earthquake reconstruction on the Build Back Better. Initially, when the government was planning to go for the Build Back Better, was thinking of that whether only reconstructing the house in a better way or reconstructing the life in a better way. So that the whole dilemma of the reconstruction of infrastructure got translated into the reconstruction of the life. It's just not the infrastructure per se in the housing and the infrastructure. So that was made ensure that how the quality of life of the people, even the allocation, where the houses reallocated people, how they will and where they will be located, and what kind of a quality of life that they had earlier and what kind of a quality of life they had in the post-reconstruction phase. So this was analyzed and the benefit monitoring was also done after the post-reconstruction. So that was very, very fine kind of example to be seen and to be replicated of thinking of that, just not the bringing of the infrastructure and infrastructure in place, but it's equally important to bring back better. It's just not that. So taking that, a clue from that is, like I will give you just one instance of that building, the empowering women as a kind of an example, and also the Build Back Better, that the houses got reconstructed and the ownership of the house were given both in the names of the men and women, which actually empowered women for the collateral kind of a thing. They can go for all kinds of economic empowerment. So there's a kind of a one lead leading to another, and there's all kind of offshoots were there. So the point which I would try to add here is just not focusing on the infrastructure Build Back Better, but the rebuilding of the life in terms of the Build Back Better. Thank you very much for giving me opportunity.
Thanks, Santosh. Thank you very much. Thanks. Huh?
Is there time for questions?
I don't think we have time for questions, but if you have, there's 1 minute, maybe. Huh? Yeah, and there are some leaflets over there, and we have 1 minute, maybe about 50 seconds. So if anybody wants to make a desperate comment, yes. Otherwise, you can talk to them.